This is day 236 of Ukraine's resistance. This is Mediacentru Ukraine. My name is Vasil Samokhvalov. We're starting our briefing. With us today is Oleksandr Merezhko, head of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Foreign Policy and Interparliamentary Cooperation. Sir, hello. Thank you for having us, colleagues. Pane Oleksandr, we don't have that many questions, but they're extremely important. Firstly, Belarus. The Belarusian, the legally or illegally elected authorities in Belarus have begun to crystallize their position all the more and taking Russia's side. What diplomatic steps are we to expect from Ukraine? The thing is that on a strictly from the point of view of strictly international law, Belarus is an accomplice of an aggressive war, as an act of an act of aggression. So as of now, Belarus and Russia together are fighting against Ukraine. They're in a state of war. This is the legal side of the issue. And of course, we have to respond in some way. At the same time, we see that step by step, Belarus is not only granting its territory for perpetrating this act of aggression by Russia, but there are also questions about the direct involvement, Belarusian army's direct involvement in the aggression against Ukraine. This might happen. And so the question, this is a very complicated question of our diplomacy. Of course we have to respond. But I would like to remind people, as an international lawyer, that sometimes it's not just difficult to establish diplomatic relations. Sometimes this requires formality, but sometimes breaking off diplomatic relationship is difficult. Stopping them is sometimes it's an act. It's a foreign policy act. It's a diplomatic act that requires also some formalities. And how to do this properly is a question to our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. However, I'm sure that this is a question. This question of stopping diplomatic relations with Belarus has to be put on the agenda, and something has to be done. For instance, if we stop diplomatic relations, this does not mean at all, from the point of view of international diplomatic law, this does not mean that that consular relations cease. Consular relations can continue, within which we can continue to protect the rights and the interests of our citizens who are in the territory of Belarus. So international law does have the tools that allow us to protect the rights of our citizens. And we have to think about this as well, how to do this and in what form to do this. Do we need to introduce a visa regime with Belarus? Again, this step requires, I would say, we have to weigh the pros and cons of this step. I personally would prefer an introduction of a visa regime, and that is because I see this as a matter of national security. We need to protect ourselves, our security, against abuses of the non-visa regime by the Belarusian authorities. We all understand that the Belarusian authorities are currently under significant control from the aggressor state, which is Russia. Of course, the Russian special forces can use the visa-free regime in their interest, and we have to take this into account. And I think we should introduce the visa regime. Now, can we talk about Iran? In spite of the fact that Iran is denying the supplying of drone and UAV assistance to Russia, it's quite clear this is Iranian technology. How are diplomatic relationships between Ukraine and Iran to continue to develop? Well, first of all, we have to find proper evidence, because of course Iran denies this. But according to the information we're getting, including from open sources, including from the article in Washington Post about the fact that the Iranian authorities may be supplying Russia with missiles. There's also some information about the fact that the so-called guardians of the Islamic Revolution, basically military personnel of Iran, are in occupied territory of Crimea, that there are such people in Crimea. All of this points to the fact that Iran is possibly even entering a state of war against Ukraine. This is extremely dangerous. I understand that we have to test this information, to check this information, but we have to respond to this. Perhaps even try to get ahead of events a little bit. If this information is confirmed, we must cease diplomatic relations with Iran. A step has been taken by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Our relations with Iran have been downgraded, as we know, but we have to respond to every unfriendly act, hostile act from from the side of the Iranian authorities. By the way, we can raise the question, if this is confirmed, this information is confirmed that I've mentioned, we might raise the question of recognizing Iraq as a state sponsor of terrorism. We know that, sorry, Iran, a state sponsor of terrorism. We know that the United States have already recognized Iran as the state sponsor of terrorism. We can set this question as part of our within our legal framework, and also raise this question before other countries, and demand that Iran is recognized as a state sponsor of terrorism. By the way, we might also raise the question of freezing and confiscating and seizing assets and properties of Iran in order to compensate the damage and the harm that we have as a result of the use of Iranian drones. Will this help Ukraine improve relations with the countries that are traditional competitors of Iran in the region? This is a question of policy. Of course, there are situations when, yes, there are it's a very difficult situation in the region, even historically. For instance, I would like to point out the positive response from Israel, from the minister of Israel, and we all understand that Iran is an enemy to some states, and so we can turn, for instance, to Israel with a request to strengthen their support and perhaps even to provide corresponding weapons. So this geopolitical aspect has to be taken into account. And the final question, perhaps, Russia. Where will diplomacy lead Russia after the votes in the PAC and at the UN General Assembly? Diplomatically, we might say that Russia is in isolation. Unfortunately, not complete isolation, because it would be nice to see this isolation supported by countries like China and India, who unfortunately are rather economically supporting Russia. We need to work with these countries, including through our friends and allies, but we see a very clear trend. First of all, Russia was first recognized on this important at the PACE was recognized as a terrorist regime. This is, of course, a very important step in the right direction. I really hope that it will lead to the fact that European states, or at least the states that are members of the Council of Europe, will recognize Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, a terrorist regime. And as far as the resolution in the General Assembly, we might also note a positive movement. We see that more countries are starting to understand, to realize the danger of Russia, and are supporting resolutions aimed at supporting the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Understood. Thank you very much. With us was Oleksandr Merezhko, head of the Parliamentary Committee of for Foreign Policy and Interparliamentary Cooperation. We've been talking about Belarus, Iran, and Russia.